It's easy to use translation. But the reality is that words have different connotation, have different sentiment, have different history.
Take care of Hreflang and you're good for international SEO.
Reality of international SEO is that it's not only technical, it's not only content.
Welcome to the Performance SEO Unpacked podcast, where leading experts reveal practical solutions for scaling enterprise and e-commerce growth. Deep dive into cutting-edge AI SEO strategies.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Performance SEO Unpacked. I'm joined today with Amir, who works at Crocs and has great experience of working in international SEO. Today, he's going to be sharing with us some insights on how to maneuver the international SEO space. Welcome to the podcast, Amir.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate being included and invited to join here. We're looking forward to chatting today.
Absolutely. So getting right into the podcast, international SEO, whenever somebody talks about, typically most of the people think about Hreflangs, that you kind of take care of Hreflang and you're good for international SEO. But I guess it's a lot more than that. What's one major cultural factor that you think, can make or break an international SEO strategy?
It's an interesting subject. I think, the world of international SEO it's always been thought of as kind of a technical first initiative, right? For most brands. And one that's certainly challenging, right? Like it's requiring extra meta tags. It's requiring, language shifts, sometimes subdomains and subdirectories. There's kind of this technical infrastructure that's required as a starting point for any international SEO initiative. And I think that majority of brands start there. And sometimes they think that, well, because of how challenging those technical pieces are, that must be all we have to do. If we can get the tech part down, we have enough to kind of move into an international market. I think the reality of international SEO is that it's not only technical, it's not only content, right? It's not only just kind of translating your content, but there is this kind of cultural and user flow perspective that brands really need to consider that's beyond the technical, beyond the content, and really comes back to the user first mentality of what does a user in an international location look like, and what might their kind of search queries reflect a reflection of change in search intent. How does their search intent change as you go from region to region, from language to language? How does their purchase process change? Are they kind of thinking about the same things? Are they considering the same reasons to buy as your home country's audience or the user base that you're used to? So I think when it comes down to like one major cultural factor that can make or break, it really comes down to, are you putting your user, especially that new kind of international user, are you putting them first in every choice that you make? And sometimes it might be a complete shift in your experience. Most brands have a traditional user flow of, you land on a homepage, you digest a category page, and then you're kind of down to some type of product, some type of service page before, before engaging with the brand in a meaningful way. That's not true for every user in every part of the world. Sometimes there's more questions. Sometimes there's more need for building trust and that sort of thing. Understanding history, right? The history of a brand, the history of a particular product. All of those things, I think, kind of make or break the experience for an international user. And understanding that culture, understanding that user's culture is sometimes the first place before you tackle some of the technical and content related challenges.
So yeah, that's a great point. It takes you down way deep into understanding of the user intent. Following up on that point, have you ever experienced a keyword that meant something very different in one country, whereas you had to deal with, it in a very different way in a different country, and it meant completely different for the brand?
100%. Yeah. It's interesting coming back to when you have this SEO hat on and you're looking at, how do I convert the entirety of this site or this product line into another language for another region? It's easy to use translation, right? I just need to translate this keyword, call it a day. I'm selling shoes. I'm going to look up what is shoes in every other language in every other region. and we're selling the same product, right? And that seems pretty straightforward. But the reality is that words have different connotation, have different sentiment, have different history. There's this whole world of etymology in every region, in every language, that's generally ignored by, especially us in the West. The Western world tends to ignore some of that etymological history. And so when it comes down to like individual keywords, it's also important to understand, what does this mean culturally? What does this mean regionally and dialectically? And so a perfect example in kind of this world of Crocs, we sell shoes, but more specifically, we sell clogs. And so the classic clog kind of silhouette that everyone's familiar with in the Crocs world, clog in other languages means a lot of different things,
Hmm.
even in English, right? Like you have an English translation of clog to clog. My favorite example is in the Netherlands. Clog, and a classic clog especially, means something very different than the silhouette that's on our site. It
Hmm.
means this wooden, kind of very historically relevant, especially to the region, this wooden footwear piece. And it has this historical cultural relevance to it that is so beyond the silhouette of the product that we have. And so in a lot of ways, you have these two kind of competing icons in a very specific region. In the Netherlands, in Dutch culture, clog doesn't necessarily mean just a shoe that you slip in and that's, kind of flat underfoot. It's specific to that culturally relevant icon. And so I think when you have especially two iconic silhouettes that are kind of now competing for the same keyword, it's important to kind of recognize that culture and, call it out explicitly that, hey, this is a classic clog style that's flat underfoot that, is easy to slip on and off. And you start finding that you're describing, even though people get what a Croc is, right? Like
Yeah.
we know what a classic clog looks like. Everyone kind of recognized that icon, but it's important to describe it more carefully in regions where, it might not mean the same thing. And the same goes for a lot of Europe. Sabot, which is SABOT, technically means clog in languages like French. But again, it's going to represent something that's vastly different to what we, especially in Western cultures, think as a clog, as
Yeah.
that one image. So I think, again, kind of putting that user first, taking your SEO hat off and
Hmm.
putting your good culturally relevant human hat back on and saying, hey, what does this mean in another language? Is this dialectically relevant, or am I getting into a world that's a little shaky?
That's a very interesting example. In our experience that we've had with some of our clients, we've generally been dealing with, keywords like some countries will have sale as a word, to talk about offers. The other one are more common with deals as their daily dialect. What are the deals around it? Some of the others will say, what's the sale around it? Because typically tied around, the Thanksgiving and the Big Friday, Black Friday event. But this is
Right.
like completely taking just the meaning of the product, which is clogs, which is a flagship product, I guess, for Crocs, just means completely different in a different region. That's just mind blowing. And it how you mentioned and you broadened the entire scope and learning process for an SEO person, right? Not just knowing technical SEO and the way and the nuances of the SEO industry, but also learning the history and the culture around it. It just broadens the spectrum so much for an SEO. It just sounds like a lot of fun for me here.
It is. And you know, and I appreciate you saying that immensely, because for me, it takes you outside of the world that we live in, and then,
Yeah.
it takes you beyond your front door. And I think that that's good for kind of every person to do, regardless of industry, regardless of, what company you work for, what your origin is and what your kind of home country is. I think it's kind of a fun exercise to take a step back and say, man, it's a big world out there. It's a big
Yeah.
world out there that's all doing something similar, but also something different, and recognizing what those differences are and being able to say, man, it is cool to think that, there's someone just like me in another part of the world looking up a new shoe purchase and researching it in the same way and getting different results and having different needs and being able to meet those needs, in kind of new and creative and meaningful ways. It's a really, really fun thing to do that, goes so far outside of just SEO and really goes into the world of like oh man, yeah, I'm learning about another culture. I'm learning about
Yeah.
another kind of history and being able to kind of put myself, no pun intended, in another person's shoes.
Yeah, super interesting, super interesting. Coming from a technical standpoint, scaling international SEO can be challenging from a technical standpoint, multiple different domains, multiple languages. What is that one underrated, SEO tactic that can really help you scale the SEO growth internationally?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's two things that come to mind. The first is our favorite Hreflang tags. Hreflang tags are bare to contend with. Even at a glance, when they seem simple, they still have this kind of underlying challenge of, well, there's three different ways to implement an hreflang tag, and are the search engines respecting that tag, and showing the right URL to the right type of user and that sort of thing. So I'd say that that's certainly kind of the first place where big mistakes can happen, targeting the wrong language, the wrong region, having formatting issues, whether you're deploying via sitemap or deploying via meta tag. So take the time and intentionality to do that right from day one. I think that that's going to set you up for success. I think that the other component to that is kind of these intentional decisions and intentional decision making process around having a site experience that's ready to be deployed to a larger audience in advance of putting it out there, in advance of using hreflang tags to kind of target this new region, this new language. A lot of brands, and we're certainly guilty of this too. A lot of brands, they're like, great, the site is ready to go. And on day of launch, we want to start targeting this new language in this new region without really thinking like, is this a fully launched experience? Have the bugs been worked out? If 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people were to come and buy products on our site from that language and region, would they be happy with their experience? If the answer is no through any of that user flow, then it's probably time to kind of, take it back into staging, work on it some more, and really focus on some of those experience changes required before launching to an audience. Because the other thing that you have to remember is you're not just launching the same site in a new region or language, you're exposing a whole new audience, a whole new region and language to your brand for the first time. Crocs is certainly lucky, and the Hey Dude world, right? Like our sister brand is certainly lucky that large majority of the world has probably heard of us, has probably seen our products, has seen them in the wild, that sort of thing. That's a really, really cool thing. And we're certainly lucky to have that. But that's not the case for every brand. That's not the case for every site. So, I think that intentionality piece, that just being intentional around, this is the first time that, you know, a person speaking this language in this region is going to be exposed to our brand, to our experience. Is that really the exact experience that we want? That first impression, is that really good? Is that exactly what we want it to be? And if any of those answers are no, then it's probably time to, to kind of take it back to staging. So I think that those are the two biggest mistakes. It's getting the targeting the technical pieces right and making sure that that is really, really well locked in. And then, kind of the second half is just remembering that this is the first impression of your brand to this language and region. Is that
Mm.
impression going to be a good one?
Interesting. That brings me to a point, if for our listeners, is there a quick top of the mind checklist that you can, just mention some of the items that you would always want anybody launching a new market, in international SEO to must go through or to swear by? What could that checklist contain?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, it's making sure that there is like a well represented change in your user flow. So it's, do your collection pages accurately reflect the new language and region? Are you not only translating the content on the page, but translating things like URLs? Are you then targeting those URLs with hreflang targets? So using the tags to target the right language and region. And again, making sure that those match up. A lot of the times you'll have some English language content, but you're targeting like a German language speaking user within, the German region, that sort of thing. making sure that those all kind of match up from experience to experience is going to be a key to part of that. I would also say that that checklist can be using the tools available to you. There are so many great international SEO resources and tools out there, partners like yourself that can help you navigate this process. Certainly ResultFirst, go to them. You know what I mean? Like go to the experts over on your side of things, and be able to kind of ask those questions in advance, because it's a team. It
Yeah.
really does take a village. It really does take a team to get these things right. And I would also say, like, turn to the experts that have been doing this for years. I know when you and I first introduced ourselves to each other, we were talking about Aleda Solis.
Yeah.
Aleda is an amazing resource in the space, has been in the SEO world, is an absolute rock star for so many years. Aleda is the go-to for anyone like myself, including myself, when it comes to just SEO gut checks in the international SEO space. So if you're doubting something, use the tools on Aleda's site, use some of those kind of checklists that she's built, because the resources are out there. It's a tough thing to navigate, but you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you for the shout out. And I love it when you mentioned that it takes a village to launch an international SEO campaign and doing it right.
It really does. It really
Yeah.
does.
Well, can you share a time where, a small SEO tweak, an international SEO tweak could have brought a massive impact on the returns and the revenue for the organization?
Yeah, 100%. So the example is actually not in my current role, but in a previous role, without saying brand names, they were a major financial institution. So selling credit cards, that sort of thing. Credit cards, loans, they had a whole loan division, that sort of thing. Their name rhymes with Riscover. So you can probably guess who I'm talking about. They were launching in various countries, various regions. They obviously don't have a huge international presence. They're primarily US based, but they wanted to kind of have content that was easy to digest all over the world. And they found that even though their Hreflang targets looked good, had kind of every component correctly built, they were deploying it via header meta tag. So with meta tags that existed in the header. The issue was that because of the setup of lazy load that were on kind of built into their tech stack, the header wasn't properly loading in time and wasn't properly rendering in time for the search engines to pick it up and respect it to be able to deploy the right
Interesting.
URL to the right user. And so what was simple enough was just copying and pasting, basically copying and pasting those meta tags into a sitemap and sending that as kind of a separate entity. It existed at the same time, so the meta tags were unchanged on page, but we just kind of gave like a backup in the form of a sitemap. And so realistically, it was maybe like a day's worth of work across all of their web properties, but it had a massive impact. Suddenly, the cannibalization across the various regions was gone within a few weeks. We had to let Google crawl and respect
Yeah.
that change and stuff like that, get it all submitted into Google Search Console. But within a few weeks, all the right traffic was going to the right regions, and those regions that were in the past really struggling to get traffic and revenue were starting to get a lot more engagement, and everyone was really, really happy. And so the regional partners were kind of looking at their agency partners, their regional agency partners. They're kind of looking at me, and they were like, was this really all we needed? Was it as simple as this? And the answer I have is that, like, it's never as simple as this. You know what I mean? Like, it
Yeah.
happened to be as simple as this time, but
Yeah.
boy, did we get lucky, because it could have been a much bigger project.
Yeah, I mean, these are so celebratory moments in the life of an SEO, I guess, when you find that small tweak that can bring in such a major impact. The other day in one of the other podcasts, I was talking to Liam, and we were talking about migrating large websites. And as simple as updating the robots.txt, that can make or break your entire strategy. Was
Right.
Yeah, it's equally, relevant there. Just not making sure that it's being rendered properly can just
Yes.
completely make or break the whole thing. It's so hilarious.
At the end of the day, we are at the beck and call of the search engines themselves.
Yeah.
And, we're operating within an existing ecosystem. We're not making the rules. We are playing by them. And I think SEOs sometimes forget that, especially like the damn good ones tend to forget that, where they're like, oh yeah, I can manipulate and mold the search engines to do whatever I need. A lot of times that's true, but the reality is that we're still playing their game,
Yeah.
and we have to abide by their rules. And if for whatever reason, they feel like we're doing something wrong, the search engines feel like we're doing something wrong, we've got to listen to that. We've got to, pivot where we need to. So it's a tough thing, and it's a humbling thing to be reminded of that. But yeah, when you're reminded, it's a slap in the face. It's a real slap in the face.
What's that, basis all these experience of working with international SEO, what's that one advice that you would give to anybody who's listening, trying to get into international space, that they must swear by while, picking up an international SEO project?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think what it comes down to is integrating into these communities.
Ah.
Ultimately, you're serving the community that you're kind of reaching. So it's not just about translating. It's not just about, technical SEO. I think it's even more than trying to accurately reflect, a cultural change for your users. It's really about getting into that community and understanding it. And if you have access to the community, great. Talk to the people in that community, in that region, that speak
Mm.
that language. Try and get a sense of, where their heads at, where some of their motivations lie, what life is like, for people living in that country, in that region, speaking that language. But more so, it's doing the research. It's not just necessarily integrating directly into that community, talking to those people, but it's also just researching what life is like there. I think that that's probably a must follow kind of, piece, because it comes down to, you got to do right by that community. If you're producing something or selling something, or, even letting, this community digest content, even if it's just reading content, if it's not serving that community's needs, then you're doing a disservice to them, and you're doing a disservice to the world. And I think especially now, with the kind of the freedom of information, the freedom of technology that we have in today's world, there's so much stuff out there that does a disservice to every community out there, including our own, right? There's misinformation, there's scams,
Yes.
there's so much just, pardon my language, there's so much bullshit that we have to wade through, in today's modern age. And so I think if we individually can just take a moment to say, how can I do right by this one community? How can I integrate in a meaningful way that kind of makes their life better? That's going to be the key to success. The rest of that stuff will follow, because if we don't, then we're just going to be another part of that bullshit that, that everyone's already wading through.
That's such great advice. And on the, understanding community deeply is so much more important, like you mentioned, to understanding, how the keywords changes, how the user experience of the website should adapt to that particular region. Just on the fun part, curious to know how many times you've been living in Germany or living in some other place on a company holiday to understand the culture.
Right. I know. Yeah. Not enough. I'll tell you that. Not enough. Yeah. If the Crocs leadership team is listening, send me all over, send me out there.
Yes.
I need to, I need to integrate into these communities if I'm really going to do right by them. No, I've had the pleasure of living in a lot of places in my life, and my family is from overseas. We're originally from the Middle East, and yeah, I really count myself lucky to have been exposed, and I thank my parents for exposing me, especially at a young age, to so many different cultures and so many different kind of walks of life. And having the freedom to travel has been an absolute blessing. And so yeah, I think for me, it's like I've seen a small part of the world, and it's still, I feel really, really lucky to even see that small percentage. But it was an instant reminder that there is so much more of the world to see and to experience, and to respect. And yeah, and I think that we'd all be a little better off by just, even doing the research, putting in the time to understand how those other people are living their life, and how we can better understand them.
Yeah, Totally, I agree with it. That was on the fun part where Cross should expand where your holiday destination should be.
100%. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
I'm gonna look into that. We'll see. Where haven't I been that I can get out there and maybe we need a
Yeah.
Crocs Maui,
Yeah.
central
Totally.
dedication. Yeah, yeah. I think we have some stores out there. Maybe we'll have to plan a visit soon.
Yes, totally. Well, it's been a great conversation. Where can people follow you and learn more about you, on the international SEO front?
Thank you so much. No, I appreciate it. Yeah. So, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, my full name. I'm probably the only one out there. And yeah, look for my ugly mug on LinkedIn. Yeah, I think that's probably the best place to connect with me. I really love doing what I do. I really, really love helping brands out with just figuring out these kind of little things, the little questions that become the big problems. I really do love doing this, and I've been doing it a long time. I'm coming up on my 12th or 13th year in the SEO
Wow.
world, and I really, really love doing it. So if you're, looking for help, if you're a brand looking for help, reach out. Let's chat. I'd love to be able to help. I do that quite a lot of just kind of talking to other brands and working out what issues they have, because it's fun for me. For me, it's investigative. It's a lot like solving a puzzle. It's a lot like,
Yeah.
detective work more than anything. And that's the fun part for me. I'll tell you what, I've produced enough title tags for a lifetime. So when brands come and they're like, hey, we've got a problem and we need help diagnosing it or kind of figuring out what's going on, that's the fun part.
That's
That's
the
the fun.
fun part. Yeah, totally. Totally. I agree. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been a fun, interactive episode. I hope the listeners enjoy it. And it was great chatting with you.
Great chatting with you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.